uh, start this finance committee meeting, which is going to go over and discuss the audit of the, I was going to say the credit cards and how we do the travel process as it relates to it. But that said, I see Councilor Majuk, I see Councilor Carney, Councilor Josiah is in the background, Councilor Green, and we have the auditor, Nader Maroon.
Councilor Hogan's here too,
Councilor Hogan, you're talking the whole time, and it's like right in my face, I overlook it. It's because of the baby in the background. So the audit, it has like roughly 10 findings, and it has responses from the administration and then sometimes another response from the auditor. So I'm not sure how best, if you want to start with the audit, maybe Nader, could I allow you just to talk about your audit a bit, and then we can move from there? Does that seem reasonable?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. And I think for purposes of your meeting today, a good portion of the audit focus on the purchase card utilization comes to travel. So I think it's a nice marriage between the two. Let me just start off by saying that we had great cooperation from the administration on putting this together. It was the first audit since this purchase card program was passed in 2013, in August of 2013. And it was part of the ordinance requirement that this be done on an annualized basis, but that hadn't been accomplished. So this was the first and only audit that's been done of the purchase card program. And you can see from looking at the audit to some of the utilization of the purchase cards didn't ramp up for about a year and a half. And then it started to escalate in terms of utilization, and it's been expanded. And you can see from the responses from the administration that they recognize, the current administration, that they recognize the utilization increase and the need for better internal controls. So let me also say that there remains some confusion relative to the purchase card program and how many cards there are available for this program. I happened to be on the council at the time that we passed the original legislation. There was one card authorized only, and in subsequent references, there seems to be some confusion as to whether there's a purchase card that's separate for just purchasing of supplies or other things that people would want to procure, and a one for travel purposes. There is only one card, and that needs to be clarified and understood. Also, at the time that this original ordinance was passed, there were some guidelines mentioning what this purchase card could be used for or not used for. One of those areas that it was identified was for travel, which we're going to discuss here later. But the travel portion of it was to be used only with pre-approval of the travel. And there's some issues that have resulted about pre-approval and approval process and timeliness of it. And again, I'll defer that until we get into discussions, because I have some comments on the travel policy legislation that has been drafted and how that the purchase card may impact that as well. Overall, like you heard from the external auditor, what we found from the audit that we did and was recognized, I think, also by the administration, is that there are some internal control problems in terms of process documentation, timeliness. We had one department that they had not, each department is supposed to submit to the Commissioner of Finance by the 10th of the month their receipts for anything that they have purchased or utilized the card for. We had one department, there had been a delay of 6 months of materials. And so there are other issues of people paying sales tax, which we shouldn't be doing, utilization of an easy pass and how that should or shouldn't be used relative, and there were some fines levied against the card or the city. So overall, I think it was very instructive and helpful to go through and identify the findings. And as I said, the administration pretty much agreed with everything that we identified. The one area that we seem to have a continued disagreement, however, is it was a recommendation of the audit that because of the COVID circumstance that we're in and people not traveling, et cetera, and then subsequently the submission of the administration of a new travel policy, that we recommended that the purchase card program be suspended temporarily so that we could have a thorough review of policies and procedures and making sure that we get these things in place so that we don't have the internal control problems we have. And I would recommend that we still do that. And I did in the response that I received from that we received from the administration on that finding. They didn't think that it was necessary at this time to temporarily suspend the program. But again, I think that this is a good timing to really look at this program. And let me close by just saying that, again, there's only one card, and the original guidelines that was produced to go along with the purchase card guide, purchase card program, somehow or other, I don't know the exact date, and we weren't able to determine the date, that there was a supplemental or an additional guide, and it was referenced, it was called the City of Syracuse Purchase Card Guide for Travel. I don't know who did this. We couldn't discover. My suspicion it was in the law department. And I had heard that one of the attorneys in there may have drafted this, but I don't believe that it came to the council. We couldn't make any determination that was to occur. So our identifying this subsequent guidelines for travel was done without approval by anyone, particularly with the Common Council. And subsequently, there are things in it that like the 10th of the month reporting timetable, and it wasn't consistent with the travel policy that was identified on the city's website under SharePoint, dated 2017 from the previous administration. There's inconsistencies in that. So again, I want to reiterate this because there's only one card, and that card is not specifically for travel and other things. It's meant to be utilized comprehensively, but I think that there are issues that need to be addressed, and that's why we suggested a temporary suspension. And I think the importance of what you're looking at with the draft legislation, and I hope I have a chance to speak to that too, because I can address that in the context of both the purchase card and then concerns that I would see as the auditor with what the draft legislation has been presented. Thank you.
Okay, so you said the point about one card. I thought I read the original intent was that every department would have a card. Was that the idea?
The option was there available for each department if they chose to want to get a card. It wasn't mandatory, it was an option of choice.
So do you know how many departments use the card over the period of time?
Well, currently there are 15 cards. And that pretty much has stayed the same. I don't know if Commissioner Del Vecchio was on. I don't recall when I was on the council exactly how many were issued in 2013 or early 2014. But the listing that we were provided, there was actually 13 departments, but 15 cards. And I think the police had 2 cards.
So are you saying there was only
Cards, but not
one card? I don't understand the part you're saying about one card.
There's supposed to be only one card, according to the original ordinance. There would be one card per department should they choose to opt to participate in the program.
The original order was one card per the city or one card per department?
One card per department.
Okay.
A quick question. Why you think, Councilor Rod? Now, is that card, city order, is that card for both the traveling, to be used for traveling and other purchases? Or were they separate per department?
Yes, the one card was available for purchases of goods and also for travel based on pre-approval process.
Okay.
So this is,
Go ahead, Council.
no, this was Adria. I was going to jump in to provide a little bit of context because I think, Brad, you might have to talk about a lot of this, but you weren't here for at least some of it, and perhaps some mistakes were made. So in the summer of 2018, my office, we surveyed the city and was like, what's something that everybody wants to fix? And it was the travel policy. A lot of departments just found it really cumbersome. It took a lot of man hours. Travel papers got lost. People had to front a lot of expenses. And so we went through this series of workshops and proposed some recommendations that we are just now bringing to you all to actually put into fruition. One of the things, though, that we did propose sooner rather than later, and we got the blessing of both the finance department and the law department, was to add a travel credit card or travel purchase card. And the reasoning behind this, which admittedly I did not go back and read any legislation about this, was that we were told that we could not use the purchase cards for travel. And so just as the reason, so maybe that was wrong, but that was what was conveyed to all the departments. And so instead, you had people who were upfronting money. And, you know, just as an example, our office traveled once, and my staff couldn't upfront their own plane costs. Even though it was going to get reimbursed, they didn't have the means to pay for that up front. And so I put everybody's airfare on my personal credit card, and then, you know, like 2 months later got reimbursed for it after we traveled, after the reimbursement paperwork was filed. There were lots of stories about this all over the city. And so one recommendation that we made was, could we, you know, have a card that can be used for travel? And again, that was because the rules that were at least conveyed to us was that we couldn't use the existing purchase card to cover travel expenses. And so there were other rules that came with that. And so, for example, we said, but you can't take the travel card with you. So you can't use it and, you know, charge your dinner to it or charge your cab fare to it. It can only be used for those upfront recommendations. So I'm going to pause there and let you all react. Because it sounds like we potentially did something that was incorrect.
Let if I may, please, so thank you, Adria, for that context. So I don't know who the they is that told you that you couldn't use the travel card, the purchase card for travel. It's clearly in the ordinance, and it's under the purchase card coordinator area. It's general ordinance under section 2-76. And it says very specifically, travel and travel related expenses with pre-approved travel request authorization are acceptable. So somebody gave you the wrong information, number one. Somebody also gave you the right information about not taking the card with you, because that was also not allowed. And the guidelines that were identified, it says about where the card has to be stored and kept. And there is a purchase card coordinator and there's a purchase card holder. There's an application that needs to be filled out. So, I mean, all that was identified in the audit and in the original ordinance and the guidelines. So whomever told you that, I don't understand where they got that information from. Do you know?
I spoke with the commissioner of finance, and like I said, we engaged the law department in all of this as well. So, I mean, it seems to me like that's a relative, like, right? We did it wrong. Like, stop doing it. Everybody cut their travel credit cards up, right?
So how does it work with okay, so there's 15 cards. How many people authorized users or whatever the term is? How many have like done the paperwork to be a person who can spend on the credit card?
So I'll jump in, the Commissioner of Finance, or I can also weigh in on it. So if the applicant is from the department, fills out the forms and that is required, and then that person, the coordinator, will work within the department to determine what is needed or to be purchased, et cetera, et cetera. So they will be the person who utilizes the card for on the department's behalf. The other point is, and also that Adria just raised relative to not being able to take the card with you to pay for meals. Again, at least from the travel policy issue that was on the city's website, on the SharePoint, rather, excuse me, it was dated 2017. And I think there was information prior to that. I'm not sure where it was posted, but I remember when I was as a counselor, there's always been the per diem rate for travel purposes. And so there shouldn't be any need for the travel card to be taken with somebody to be able to purchase food or to pay for certain kinds of things. In the same way, relative to mileage, the city has always followed the IRS guidelines. To the best of my knowledge, they've always followed those guidelines. So there wouldn't be the need for that to buy gas or any of that. And they would also try to get a city vehicle. But again, those are details that are in the legislation here that is being proposed, so we could talk about it then.
Do we know how many transactions there were in each year period? And then do we know the total dollar amounts? I didn't see those in the audit. But...
Eston is on here. Eston, did you have the back the information?
Hi, Counselor. I don't have the exact number of transactions that I have. I could get that number for you. And the total dollar amount, as far as like what specific dollar amount, like just on the card per month.
Well, if you looked at all the transactions, what would they total up to? I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of how frequently the card option is used, and then what types of purchases they're actually using it for.
Okay, yeah, I do have that information. We took it, it was originally in the audit, we took it out, but I can get it to you. Yeah,
Because I mean, I would say that I think the card
let me see.
option can be a reasonable way to help with some of these travel expenses, so that it's all documented and stays on the city side of transaction, not into Adria's personal credit card for four
Right.
people.
Yeah, I agree.
Eston, what's the total amount? Do you have the total amount? What are we talking about as far as money goes here?
Give me 1 second.
Well, he's looking
Get
for
on my
that.
computer.
Let me interrupt. Also, when the department applicant submitted a request for the card, each department was given a certain budget limit in terms of the amount that they could have and use the card for on an annualized basis. And so that number varied from a low of 300 to a high of $10,000. So the city clerk's office had, they I think were like at 300 was the allocation available for them. And the police department was 10,000. That's the range.
Was that for the travel cards or the purchase cards?
That was for the purchase cards.
What was the reason for that, Nader?
Here.
Anybody?
Sorry.
The reason, go ahead, Alicia.
Oh, sorry. I just want to clarify. So those amounts were well, a couple things. Number one, I think the confusion was that a lot of departments didn't have procurement cards when API started looking at the travel stuff. So they weren't able to they were told at the time they weren't able to use those cards for travel because they were for different departments. So that was some of the confusion coming from departments. So then they applied to have this travel card, which is the same thing as the procurement card, but those amounts then are based on their travel budgets for the year.
Nader, could I ask you just one question? I'm a little confused, which isn't unusual. One, you keep on, we got 15 cards, correct, out there?
Yes.
And so, but they're on, when you say there's only one card, you mean there's one account? Is that the idea?
Yes.
So 15 cards in one account. Okay, I got that cleared up.
So just to add further to that confusion, Counselor, so at the end, as I said, as part of the ordinance, it's required that each department submit by the 10th of the month their whatever receipts and documentation they have, and that has to go to the Commissioner of Finance, and then the Commissioner of Finance has the responsibility to pay the bill. We get one bill that comes to the Finance Department for utilization of this card, these cards. And so when the Commissioner gets the documentation from the departments, as Alicia just pointed out, they make those allocations against whatever budget line they had in their department to accommodate the cost of their expenses for the card.
So a quick question. So if there are 15 cards and correct me if I'm wrong, don't we have 30-something departments?
Again, Counselor, each department at their own discretion can decide whether or not they want to get a card.
Okay, and then if they have travel, how do they get access to it, or do they just go under other departments?
So if you're saying if a department does not have a purchase card and they want to travel, how do they pay for that?
How do they pay for that?
Again, I think each department would, if a department rather didn't have a purchase card, they would have in their budget, approved budget from July through the course of the fiscal year, they'd have travel and training monies, and they would apply for those in the travel policy that was stated on point where they would go through the approval process. Included in the audit, we gave an example of the fire department, which I wasn't suggesting that everybody do that, but it was to show you the extreme of which, if you take a look at what the fire department goes through an approval process, it's pretty significant. So each department would have its own guidelines, but they would follow the travel policy that was stated on the SharePoint, submit it in a timely fashion. In fact, one of the points of that in terms of a timeliness up against the proposed legislation here, if I may, was before a department would have to submit a request 2 months in advance. The proposed legislation is talking about changing that, and so that's one of the conversation pieces I think we should have about it, because not every department has the card.
Can I chime in here for a second? This is Brad O'Connor. I think a lot of the confusion is stemming from 2 cards, 2 policies, and we agree that it's confusing. It's confusing to have 2 different cards that are all part of the same program, one for travel, one for purchasing. It's also confusing to have a purchase card program with some travel policies in it and a travel program with some purchasing policies. And I think, Auditor, that's where you're seeing some inconsistencies. I think it leaves it up to that possibility that we have inconsistencies if we've got policies living in 2 different places. So I think a lot of this confusion could be resolved by separating these 2 programs and assessing them. When we're looking at travel, we're looking at the travel policy. When we're looking at purchasing, we're looking at the purchasing policy. But the crossover is creating some redundancy, some confusion, and some conflict.
Well said.
Excuse me, Brad, do you think that we could use 1 card, or we need to have 2 cards? We need a travel card, and we need a purchase card.
I think we can use 1 card. I think the travel guidelines live in the travel policy. Anyone traveling needs to follow those guidelines. I don't think having a separate card helps that. I think we've got to monitor activity against the travel policy anyway. Creating a second card just creates confusion.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
So what does the monitor do? The monitor just assesses what comes in as far as, what's the monitor do? Keep track of the card in each department? It doesn't approve the travel or purchase or anything like that, right?
No.
What do they do then? Just keep track of the card?
Purchase card coordinator prepares a monthly statement and cover sheet for the purchase card purchases under the authority. So the purchase card holder is the person that has the card under, that was one thing that we couldn't do because of the COVID as we were doing our audit, was to go to each department that had a card to see how these cards were being held. So there's a purchase card holder that would have the actual card. There's the purchase card coordinator, as I said, who would coordinate all the activities and submit all the receipts and documentation and so on and so forth. But again, in each department, and that's why I gave the example of the fire department in terms of their process. And I'm not suggesting that's the panacea, but what I was trying to point out was the fire department had a process whereby you had to go through these various steps to get your travel approved, whereas other departments may not be quite as thorough in terms of their processes, in terms of how they were going to get the pre-approval. But the
You might be ready to retire if you have to go through the fire department process waiting for them to approve anything. It's about 25 different steps.
But I also have to say that they didn't have any problems.
No kidding. I can see that.
So as Brad just pointed out, I think it's important that we just have the one card and one travel policy, and that has to be consistent with the purchase card guidelines identified in the original ordinance and/or amending that. Because the travel policy that proposed, travel policy that you all have, is not consistent with the travel policy that's currently either on SharePoint and/or from the original purchase card guidelines. There's inconsistencies there, as Brad mentioned.
And I think our plan would be to update that travel policy after if it gets approved.
Well, what do you mean update it after it gets approved? I think that it needs to be up based on what has been
Wouldn't
presented.
you have to vote on it first? Not you. Wouldn't the council need to vote on it first?
No, I'm not speaking for the council here.
You speaking, but I mean, it does seem like the policy that we vote on should be consistent when we vote on it, not
Right,
the other way.
correct.
But it should be aligned with the purchase card and the travel card and whatever. I mean, it should be a aligned policy. So we don't have a situation like Adria mentioned where a department head is putting everything on their own personal card. That's for an already approved travel request. That's incredible.
Yeah, one of the changes we made in the proposed travel policy is we referred to the credit card program, but rather than getting into the specifics of the credit card program, we just made reference, and the initial travel policy referenced the travel card program. We'd like to eliminate that and just have one credit card program. So a couple of those changes were made so that it's clear that there is a policy regarding credit cards and we are not going to address it in this travel policy.
Now, I have a question. No, sorry, Brad. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I'm just trying to understand in the first place why we had two cards in the first place. You know, was there a reason behind that?
Well, I think that was going back to my original point when I started talking. I think it seems as though there was a miscommunication, and our office, along with other offices, were like, we need a way to be able to book our travel with a city credit card or a purchase card, whatever it may be. And we were told that we would need a separate card for that. And so then a few departments applied for two cards. So I will fully admit right now, I have two purchase cards. I have a travel purchase card and I have a normal purchase card. My travel purchase card has about a $3,000 limit. My purchase card has a $1,000 limit.
And how long ago were you told like that, Adria?
2018.
Okay.
So those two cards account, it's like you have two cards, or they're totally different accounts. I'm confused on that part.
There's one account. There's one City of Syracuse account.
Right.
And there are individual users and account numbers within that one account. And so Adria has two account numbers within the one City of Syracuse account.
And then when I do my reimbursements, I do this form that then I'm going to use the wrong vocabulary word, charges the appropriate City of Syracuse budget line.
Again, just for clarification, there in the original ordinance, there makes no accounting, no ability to have two cards. And in my opinion, as the auditor, that should not have ever been issued a second card. And it just is, and the idea that we would have, as Brad pointed out earlier, two cards, just by virtue of poor Adria being confused by all this, points out to what Brad is saying. We need to have only one card that can be utilized for both. But I would also argue that the guidelines, the ordinance for the travel card program and the travel policy have to be consistent. And the fact that somebody drafted a separate guidelines for the travel card program and post-dated it 2013, again, is not good procedure, good policy. So
let me throw one more wrench. So we've got these credit cards. Some people use them for travel. It's like an option for the travel process that probably helps some people. And then there's non-travel purchases, so just regular purchases. For instance, a weekend ago, I think police wanted to buy $2,000 worth of water and food. And wanted to put it on the purchase card, but the purchase card had a limit of 1,000 something. Can somebody just speak to the
1,500
process of purchases, and when do purchases go on a credit card as opposed to being purchased through like traditional procurement or whatever it may be?
If you want to hear me, I didn't hear everything you said, Counselor. I'm sorry.
So Brad, I think it's for Brad. What kind of purchases within a department would use the credit card? I was using the example of the police department during the protest asked they wanted to use the credit card to purchase water and food, I think, but it was going to be more than $1,000, which is the limit on the credit card. But then Adria just kind of demonstrated that not everybody has $1,000 limit. So can you speak to how the credit card gets used and why when it's not travel oriented?
Yeah. So there's really two main categories, I'd say. The first one is recurring charges. These are usually purchases made online that require a credit card. And those are things like data subscriptions, software subscriptions, things that really, we couldn't go through the AP process. The other is, like you mentioned, with the police buying water, they are more in-person and immediate need purchases. The Parks Department will use the card to purchase drinks and snacks for a park event. So it's you've got to be there in person. You've got to buy them immediately, and doesn't make sense for $50 worth of water to try to go through the accounts payable system and bring a check to Wegmans.
Same way.
Councilor, if I may, under the ordinance, original ordinance, it identifies what is not to be purchased with a purchase card. Okay, so anybody in any department would be able to determine whether or not they can utilize that purchase card for whatever items, what they can't use it for.
Right, no lotto tickets, no alcohol, no
alcohol, cash advances, firearms, insurance, professional services, utilities, any items for personal use, city contract, items, tobacco, flowers, plants, association dues, memberships, temporary help, travel and travel-related expenses, including gasoline. So right there is a conflict in terms of the travel, potentially. Capital items, lottery tickets, wrapping paper, note cards, gift cards, etc. So it gives a pretty extensive list. And as was pointed out, as I mentioned at the outset, I think the utilization of the card in 2013 and early 14 is different than what the intent or the probable utilization of the card in 2020 is. So it may be time to look at that ordinance overall, not only as it relates to travel, but just in terms of the utilization of the purchase card itself. That would be a recommendation coming from the Commissioner of Finance, I would imagine. whatever Adria found from when they had their conversations with other departments. I never had seen that report or a document that they pulled together. So anyway, that should be added to it to look at.
Nadar, this is Councilor Paniagua. I'm sorry I came a little late into the call. I was in another meeting. Looking to the consolidated use of these cards for whichever departments have two cards rather than one. The district also
Counselor?
Rita, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear. Yeah, I think when you said the district, it cut off for me at least.
Oh, okay. Also has a P card. I am assuming all in the same account. They earn credits, and if we jointly do this, we can earn more credits on our favor. I think that the district, if I'm correct, receives per year somewhere around $8,000. But this could increase if we all, I mean, if we consolidate the use of the card, as you're saying. I think this is very positive. But I'm sure that Yuli and Suzanne, which I think they are in this call.
Counselor, we lost you again.
So, Councilor Paniagua, are you saying that the school district has a program where they get points, basically rewards for their credit card use, and that the city should be a part of that program so that the school district gets points for our like rewards?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that the district does have a program. They have a P card as well, but I believe that it's the same account. I mean, it's the same city account, I think. And it's encouraged, right, for the city and the district to use the card so that we earn more credits jointly. I mean, the district gets about $8,000 per year as credits for the use of this P card. And so I think
So is the school district a part of this program? Is that a true statement?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. They were the ones who initiated this back in 2013.
Can you say that again?
The school district is the one who came to the Commissioner of Finance, I believe, in 2013, and it initiated to have the card program.
Okay. So I think that Suzanne and Julie may be in this call, and I'm sure they'd be more than willing to help, you know, in this clarify, you know, how in terms of the credits and the jointly appropriate credit could be of great use for Brad to help them implement.
Nader, they're separate accounts though, right? School district account, city of Syracuse account, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's the same type of program, but we're not joined at all, right? As far as paying the bills go?
Right. The district pays the bills for their purchases and the city pays for its purchases.
So their accounts are, it's like Brad, you don't monitor their accounts too, right?
No, it's part of the same program with JP Morgan, but yeah, they control their activity.
Okay. If there's a pre-vote on anything, I agree to keep us separate. I can't imagine we have enough problems on our own, it seems like.
Other questions, counselors? Counselor Carney, Counselor Green.
Well, can we sum this up, Councilor Rudd? I think we all are in agreement that we just join into one card, right? Correct? And go from there. I think you didn't, Nader, you didn't find any obvious violations of people using this card to purchase lottery tickets or anything, did you?
No,
Your audit?
No, the only concern relative to purchasing with some people were purchasing and paying sales tax. That was a concern that we had.
And that was like for $300 or something like that, correct? Some
$356,
Yeah,
not in one purchase, but I mean in $356.
And how much money, Elston, did you come up with that figure? How much money was spent totally on our account? Elston?
Yeah, how you doing, Counselor? So for fiscal year 2019, there was a total of $107,741
For all the
for the whole year
purchase,
for all
yeah,
the
for
departments.
for both cards?
For purchasing and travel.
Okay.
And it was for Tim, it was over 600 transactions.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. Okay.
For the year.
So how we put the, Brad, you work with Councilor Rudd on this maybe as far as, well, we amend the ordinance to just have one card, or how's that work?
I don't think it's an amended ordinance. I think the ordinance doesn't speak to the second card. So I think it's the internal policy that came about after the ordinance was passed.
Would that affect, I mean, Adrian, would you think that would affect your department negatively, or any of the departments negatively?
I think the only thing that we'd want to talk about is, I think it's fine as long as our card limit could go up. And I don't even know if it's like, if we know we're going to be traveling in March, if we move our card limit up so that we could book then, and then it goes back to the $1,000, because we hardly touch our travel credit card. We don't use that frequently. But when we do use it, again, it's going over that $1,000 limit. So I think it would be just talking through that with Brad to see what makes sense.
And just for so who was the final approval? Who did they get the final approval for the $1,500 or for the water and food, the police department? Was the police chief just arbitrarily makes that decision on a situation like that, or what?
Yeah, for purchases, it's based on non-travel purchases. It's a budgetary approval. So
the department head makes that decision?
Department head makes that decision. If there's a purchase that would exceed their credit card limit, then it would be a senior staff decision.
So obviously the chief of police probably checked with one of the senior staff, like the mayor?
Probably.
And he did call us too. He did call me, and I was able to. I also involved the committee, public safety committee members.
So you approved it, Joel?
I did.
Okay.
But with my committee.
Okay.
So last on the travel policy changes, you had adjusted it more recently so that it still says mayor or budget director, right? Or something like that for the approval instead of the mayoral designee.
We took the mayoral designee out. We put it back to the mayor. We did not change it to the budget director. We still have it as a budget analyst in the new legislation. And then the other change that Brad already mentioned was taking out the travel purchase card and just calling it something like the general city credit card policy. Or
yeah, that's fine. Anybody have a thought on the budget analyst versus budget director thing?
Well, so what's the steps? It goes to the budget analyst first? And then to the mayor?
So the current process or the proposed process or both?
Well, let's go to the proposed process, because if you came up with it, I hope it would streamline things a little bit.
Yes, it will streamline things. So in the new process that we've proposed, right now it's a quadruplicate form that you have to fill out. So the person who's going to travel fills it out. They give it to their supervisor who signs off on it. They give it to their department head who signs off of it. Oh, sorry, I'm telling you what, let me stop. The new process that we're proposing is that the traveler will enter a request on a digital form that will eventually make its way. It'll go into PeopleSoft. That workflow will go to the department head, the budget analyst, and then it'll go to the mayor for the final approval. So it would be those 3 steps.
So, can
I'd
I,
rather see the budget director, to tell you the truth.
so,
The reason is travel is such a sensitive thing, even though it's like Eston said, only on whatever, how much it costs. I just think it's better to go the budget director right to the mayor, my opinion, and a budget analyst.
I agree. I think that bureaucracy should be eliminated a little bit. Reduced a little bit. I think that's just too much.
What do you think, Councilor Rudd?
What exactly are you saying?
I'm just saying, forget about the budget analyst. It should be the budget director approving travel.
And the mayor?
And the mayor, yeah.
I think we were just trying to be aware of, whether it's worth the budget director and the mayor's time and salaries to go into just approving every single travel request. So we were trying to be cognizant.
How many are we talking about, Alicia? How much do you want to travel here in the COVID world anyway?
I want to travel a ton, but
No, I think.
I don't understand.
There are right now before COVID, there were 75 travel requests a week.
75 travel requests a week?
Yes.
And those include
600 a
things
year.
like how many a year?
How many? There were 600. Aston just said we used the credit card. Oh, because travel, you could do all kinds of travel.
And that's.
Yeah, this is where we're conflating the travel, the credit card, and the travel and purchase.
Yeah, that was
the travel
and
requests
purchase.
are just to go to buildings or trainings that are free, or to the Onondaga County building, or an online training requires travel papers, that kind of stuff.
Wait a minute. Free stuff, we still got to make out the forms like we're going to pay?
That's correct.
We have proposed in our legislation, we've proposed that we don't do that anymore.
So what would that winnow it down to then, as far as requests that actually cost us money? Travel requests.
I don't have that figure.
Okay.
Hey, can I say something? Did anybody talk about like training, purchasing, training, and conferences and stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay.
That's factored into all of this. That's that's the main reason for travel.
And I think because there's so much going on, there's so much traveling going on. This is why it is so important to reduce the process. To just follow so much.
And
whatever way makes sense to make sure that we don't have to go through that full process that you just highlight. If it is cutting out the mayor or cutting out the budget director, whoever, just reduce it so that people don't have to rip their hair out just to get approval.
That was exactly the thought.
Does anybody know the total amount of travel annually? By comparison, like we have 107 that we use the credit card for, 107,000. How much do we reimburse travel each year? Or we're spending on travel, not reimbursed, but spending on travel.
Austin, do you know that?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
We used on the travel card, it was $110,000 last year. I don't have total travel in front of me here.
I just ran a quick everything we've paid out of any of our travel lines, including professional development and training. So it's not just travel, but professional development and training as well. In the current fiscal year, we've so far spent $195,000.
Right.
So one thing we've got to
Nobody traveling for the last 3 months. Correct?
Right, that includes memberships and things like that too. I could reduce it.
You're saying the current the year that's about to end. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think
And
those numbers were for 2019. I gave you.
I could run it for 2019 and I could run it for just travel costs. For just travel costs in current year, it's just under $100,000.
Either way, I just think the point is that, like, regarding the budget director and or mayor's time, it seems like this is like a sheet that gets produced, whatever, every other week or something, that is probably one page that says, here's the number of transactions this period, here's the dollar amount used by department. And like, they basically look at it and then they sign it and it's good. Like, I can't imagine they're sitting there querying in PeopleSoft to like sign off, right?
No, they get an approval form that has 3 different, so the mayor gets a form in his hands that has 3 different signatures on it already, and he has to sign that 75 times a week. I agree. I think his time is much more valuable. I think the budget director's time is much more valuable. All of these costs have already been budgeted. They've been approved as travel costs, as conference costs. So, you know, if I go to Utica for a continuing education training, that currently needs 4 levels of approval for a cost that's already been approved in the budget.
Is there an argument against making it mayor or budget director? Is there anybody who's like, oh, it can't be?
I'm okay with the budget director. I think, I mean, even we're talking, can't we have a limit as far as money goes too? I mean, if it's something outside the city, like involves air travel or something like that, maybe that should go up to the mayor. I don't know.
I agree with that. I think that's a great way to delineate what is important enough for the mayor to see and what isn't.
Yeah, if the mayor, the mayor doesn't want to be informed that some city official gets, arrested in San Francisco or something, and him not knowing that the person's there, just an example.
I think yes, I agree with that. I agree with that, and I think maybe the workload. You think about department heads, maybe their deputies or something like that should go to the mayor, but the rest maybe go to the budget director or something like that.
No, if it involves your travel.
I mean, for what it's worth, if it says budget director or mayor, the budget director works for the mayor, so the mayor can just tell the budget director, I want to know any travel above $1,000 or something. Like, I mean, I don't know that we have to legislate that.
Okay.
All right. So whatever way makes it easier.
Why don't we put together some revised language and we'll circulate it.
All right. Sounds good.
Brad,
you're talking about revised language for
the travel approval.
And so the travel approval process, in terms of its consistency with the purchase card program ordinance?
No, the purchase card program, I think they're 2 separate policies, and I don't think we want to
you can't do that. You can't have 2 separate ones again. In my opinion, you can't have a purchase card program that has travel in it as part of its ordinance, and then saying that you can utilize it for pre-approved travel process, but you don't identify, and then you change the policy for the travel policy, it's not consistent with that, in my opinion.
Well, no, the credit card program will just reference the travel policy, and it'll say it's approved for travel within the travel policy guidelines. But I don't think we want to get into specifics, because then we've got policies living in two different places, and we risk changing them in one place and not the other.
That's fine, as long as there's a reference to that in terms of the purchase card program, right? Because otherwise, I think you're going to be right back to what Adria said at the beginning of context, is that there would be confusion. You'd have two
Agreed.
different, yeah.
All right, we're at the 1 hour limit. I'm gonna cut it off, but Brad, we can talk offline on what changes, but yes, if you can take some steps to adjust based on the meeting, that would be helpful.
Counselor,
Okay.
before you go, just in terms of I haven't seen the most recent travel policy suggestion with the changes that Adria identified. But one of the glaring things that's missing, in my opinion, is that there's some liability issues. So I can either talk with you or Adria or the three of us in terms of just the observations that I have, but I haven't seen the latest policy either, or proposed legislation. Can somebody forward that to me?
Can we just forward the current version and then we can, I guess we can chat about it if that's the most appropriate venue.
Okay, if somebody could email that to me, I'd appreciate it, please.
Adria, can you do
Good
that?
action item. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, counselors.
Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian.